Good day. Welcome to the Washington Monthly Blogging Heads TV show and podcast. I'm Ed Kilgore, principal blogger at the Washington Monthly's Political Animal blog. Joining me in the absence of Paul Glastris is Washington Monthly's web editor, online editor, and also curator of the venerable blog Booman Tribune. Is it pronounced Booman or Booman? I've never really known.
Martin.
Booman. Okay, so this is the Booman, Martin Longman. We'll be joined in just a little bit by Nancy LeTourneau, who's another political animal blogger on weekends and some during the week. And there's a lot to talk about today. Martin, we'll talk for a little bit, then we'll bring Nancy in. I guess the big stories of the morning are some crazy speculation that popped up over the weekend, crazy in the sense of being kind of semi-hysterical, that Joe Biden's getting very near to launching a presidential run. That was really stimulated by a Maureen Dowd column in the New York Times over the weekend, claiming sort of vaguely sourced evidence that on his deathbed, Beau Biden had begged his father to run for president. You've got a burgeoning possibility of a government shutdown, this time over funding for Planned Parenthood, and we'll talk with Nancy about that. And then it is debate and forum week in the presidential Republican presidential race, with an unofficial forum tonight from New Hampshire, which will draw 14 candidates, and then an official debate on Thursday involving whichever top 10 candidates Fox News decides to invite based on polling data. We've also got, by the way, sort of a other shoe dropping. It's news, but not news. The president's going to announce final utility regulations governing fossil fuel emissions. We might talk about that a little later too. So, Martin, what do you make of the Biden story? Is this as I've suggested, sort of a story that's been created by popular demand, from people that are worried about Hillary, don't like Hillary, and from Republicans that are looking for a distraction from Trumpomania, or do you think it's real?
It's Maureen Dowd kind of pushed this in her Sunday column with this deathbed story. I don't know. There's no real indication in the story itself what kind of source she has. And it's a little disturbing to me. If she's making it up, that's disturbing. And if it's the Biden camp pushing out the story, that's a little weird. So I don't know quite what to make of it. If I were the Biden camp, I know Maureen Dowd is got an axe to grind with the Clintons, so
yeah.
she'll do you a favor, but that doesn't mean that's what happened here.
Well, the timing's weird too, because this is right in the middle of a continuing war of words between the Clinton camp and the New York Times over their coverage of Hillary Clinton. They're basically alleging that the Times has it in for Hillary, sees a conspiracy or a scandal in every conceivable news hook. And so here's one of their most prominent columnists dropping this particular hammer in. I mean, it kind of looks bad for the Times, doesn't it? Unless they're right.
It's kind of hard for the Clintons to complain because it's a touchy issue.
Yeah.
But if you look at the column, it's the typical Dowd. He's calling her an ice queen and a conniving and comparing her to Tom Brady.
Oh man, that's a low blow.
Yeah, well, comparing Biden to Garoppolo, whatever his name is, the backup quarterback up in New England. But yeah, I mean the way it's nothing new,
yeah.
But the hostility that she has for the Clinton camp is definitely fitting into a bigger picture because of how high profile this column is. So I don't know that they can really complain about the column because they don't know, they don't have no way of knowing what the sourcing on it is either.
Yeah, it's
But
all very weird.
yeah, what is? Have you heard anything come from the Biden camp?
No, but the part of the problem is most the really serious red hot political reporters seem to have developed sources in the draft Biden movement,
Right.
which is very, very active. And I think they're relying for them on signals, but I'm not sure anybody really has. There was one signal sent out that indicated maybe a lack of interest in a run. That's when Ron Klain, who's very, very close to the vice president, joined Hillary Clinton's campaign.
Right.
But other than that, I haven't heard any really well-sourced even guesses as to what's actually going on. And by way of background, for those who aren't complete political obsessives, what's touched a lot of this off was a single batch of polls from Quinnipiac, actually 2 or 3 weeks ago, from Iowa, Colorado, and Virginia, showing Hillary just dropping like a rock in terms of horse race trial heats against Republicans, and showing a huge spike in unfavorables from independents. So, there's this kind of incipient panic going on, which is also merging with hostility to Hillary in some quarters inside and outside the Democratic Party. So it's kind of a perfect storm.
I think one thing too is that Sanders has done better than people expect.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that indicates that there's some slack to be taken up. Because I think a lot of people don't think Sanders is got what it takes to be the nominee, but he has an attractive message, and the popularity that he's showing, the success he's showing, and enthusiasm could be transferable, or at least it indicates that there's something there to pick up. It's not that Hillary's automatically got 80% of the party and all the energy. So if you're Biden or I guess someone else, you could look at that and say she's more vulnerable than we thought.
Yeah.
There's more thirst for an alternative than maybe it looked like initially. So Sanders, in a way, could weaken her up for someone like Biden to make a decision to come in when initially he thought, it's not worth it. That's thought.
Yeah. Now Hillary's about to start a big batch of ads. So we don't quite know what they're going to be. But, in other words, she's not just sitting around waiting to see how this field develops.
Right.
And a lot of people I've talked to in the polling industry think that those Quinnipiac polls were really outliers. If that's the case, we're probably going to see some evidence pretty soon that Hillary's not as much trouble as a lot of people seem to be assuming right now. Plus, to tell you the truth, Biden ain't exactly burning things up in the polling world either. He's consistently shown himself to be weak against Hillary and also weak against the Republican field. So who knows what's going to develop. But frankly, beginning tonight, I think more attention is going to shift to the Republican side. There's going to be a unofficial forum in New Hampshire tonight, sponsored by the union leader. And interestingly enough, newspapers from Iowa and South Carolina are also sponsoring it. It's going to be broadcast on C-SPAN. And this is sort of the protest forum against the first official debate on Thursday, partly because some candidates will be excluded from that debate, and also because the early state activists are angry that this whole national polling threshold for making the first debate has drawn candidates away from them. So there are going to be 14 candidates tonight, not Donald Trump, who's decided that the union leader is, taking too many shots at him, so he's not going to dignify them with his presence. Then tomorrow we're going to find out which 10 candidates qualify for the first official debate, which will happen on Thursday. What do you think, Martin? Do you think people are going to cover this thing tonight like it's a real debate?
I think there'll be some kind of news that is created, and yeah, I think tomorrow they'll talk about it. There's gonna be video. So yeah, it'll set things up. Not really sure what the narrative is going to be. Trump's not there, so that's the story everybody wants, right? It's Trump.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So, but they'll take some shots at Bush, and we'll see. One thing that I just remembered when you were doing the intro on that was that doesn't this debate tonight run afoul of the RNC rules? Like, if you participate in this debate, doesn't that mean you're not supposed to be able to participate in the other debate, or at least originally? Wasn't it the original idea?
Oh yeah, and you notice they're not calling it a debate; it's a forum.
Right.
But they haven't, at least so far as I've seen, they haven't really indicated what I've seen about the format sounds like they're not going to let the candidates go at it with each other. It'll be a Q&A kind of format, not too different from some of the cattle calls they've already had. So, but you're right. If the RNC deems it an actual debate, then technically anybody that participates is disqualified from all of the official debates. It'd be kind of fun if they disqualified 14 candidates, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Then you'd have the Pataki, the long-awaited Pataki Jindal debate, right?
Yeah.
Anyway,
they're going to have trouble trying to enforce these rules all the way out throughout.
Yeah. Well, there's even a last-second appeal to the FEC by a really marginal candidate trying to stop the debate on Thursday because they've excluded people and haven't had clear standards. But anyway, this will be debate week for sure.
Right.
The candidate most likely to be the odd person out when Fox announces its cut tomorrow is probably Rick Perry. It doesn't look like Bobby Jindal or Carly Fiorina or Lindsey Graham, or much less Pataki or Gilmore are going to make the cut. But there's still kind of a competition between Kasich, Perry, and Christie for the 9th and 10th spots, and there are 2 more polls coming out today and tomorrow. So it'll be interesting. Now, in terms of what they're going to be talking about, other than whatever Donald Trump throws out there, a big developing story towards the end of last week is that conservatives were beginning to demand that congressional Republicans go to the mats over funding for Planned Parenthood, up to and including the possibility of a government shutdown. Let's bring in Nancy LeTourneau, our colleague from Minnesota, to talk with us a little bit about that. By the way, we really are a national show here because I'm in California, Martin's in Pennsylvania, and Nancy's in Minnesota. So, Nancy, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
So, what's your take on the whole dynamics of this Planned Parenthood thing and where it could go?
Well, what I've been reading about this morning is that prior to this whole Planned Parenthood issue, Congress was pretty much dragging its feet on approving a budget anyway. And so now they're going to go on recess and come back with only a few working days until the deadline, which is October the 1st. And one of the things I thought I'd share with you, pretty kind of tongue-in-cheek quote from Stan Collender with Forbes, who said, what the debate about appropriations has been missing so far is a highly emotional, politically toxic, and take no prisoners issue. Well, they just found one, didn't they?
Yeah, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Stan, who is probably the reigning expert on the congressional budget process, he's upgraded his estimate of the likelihood of a shutdown to 60%. Is that what you saw, Nancy?
Right. Yeah, that's the article that I saw, and so, I don't think that a lot of the sort of base of the Republican Party was probably paying much attention to the budget issues these days with all the Trump mania and everything going on. But this whole Planned Parenthood went right to their gut and got them all involved. And so now I think, it's going to become the defining issue for the federal budget question. Wow. And, the one of the interesting things for me is I think that when Mitch McConnell first became leader of the Senate this session, I took it that his primary task was going to be that he had assumed his primary task was going to be to keep a shutdown from happening. We saw that kind of play out even with, the DHS funding. He's the one that had to maneuver through all that. So as far as I see it, the weight of this is on Mitch McConnell's shoulders at this point. It sort of looks like he might be fanning the flames, even by, consenting to put it in there. But on the other hand, I think he knows just how badly a government shutdown is going to reflect on both Senate candidates as well as presidential candidates in the 2016 election. So, I don't know what his skills are going to be or what he's going to try to do to maneuver this, but he's got a big problem on his plate right now as far as I can see.
Yeah, I would note that on Friday, Eric Erickson, proprietor of the Red State blog and sort of a political commissar for the conservative movement, erupted with these posts demanding that congressional Republicans take this issue up to and beyond a government shutdown to defund Planned Parenthood, or he would, or the base would destroy the Republican Party. Destroy. He was using very inflammatory language. What makes this interesting to me is that next weekend, after the first debate, I believe 10 of the presidential candidates are going to be at Eric's annual event, the Red State Gathering in Atlanta, and he's already said he will ask each and every one of them, if they're willing to shut down the government over Planned Parenthood. So I don't know. What you said about McConnell is interesting. I don't know if the Republican establishment has sort of gotten together and decided that they have to do something to avoid a complete intra-party crisis. What it really reminds me of is the Terry Schiavo incident back in 2005, where I think that's another example of the anti-choice movement, which is an important part of the Republican Party, just pitching a fit at their lack of results they've gotten from their partnership with the Republican Party, and just sort of exploding and demanding a big, huge outcry in Congress, whether or not it accomplishes anything or not.
Well, from what I've seen, Eric Erickson has been, trying to tee up this battle for a few years now, and various things come along that, by the battle, I mean the battle between the so-called establishment and I don't know what you'd call the other side, their base. But he's been trying to tee up that kind of battle, for a few years now, and I think he might have landed finally on the one thing that could, and the timing, given budget, presidential candidates, it's all kind of coming together in a way that I think he might finally, and from my big picture perspective, that's where I draw the parallel between the congressional process over the budget and the presidential campaign. We've all been wondering how this divide in the Republican Party is going to play out. And so here you have it playing out probably in Congress and, then I think affecting the presidential candidates as well. And, so I see how this plays out probably reflects on both of those issues.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty strongly. I mean, Jeb Bush is supposedly the establishment candidate, right? And either he or Kasich. And, when you talk about Shivo, that was Jeb Bush's issue, So,
well, the question I have, and it's a perennial one, and maybe Martin could address this. We keep waiting for a Sister Soldier moment in the Republican Party. Is there anything the conservative movement can demand that goes so far over the edge, is so out of line with public opinion, that in a 17-candidate field, we can find somebody willing to say, to hell with you, Eric Erickson, I'm not going to do this. So far they've resisted the temptation to push back against the base. Lindsey Graham did say the other day that he didn't think they could shut down the government over Planned Parenthood, but then he's not going to be at Eric Erickson's little clam bake in Atlanta. What do you think, Martin? Maybe 10 to 20% of the Republican rank and file, don't like the base, don't like Eric Erickson, don't want to shut down the government. Is somebody going to go after that constituency?
You mentioned Lindsey Graham, who is also broken ranks on certain gay rights issues. I don't know where Carly Fiorina might come down on something like this. I'm not sure what Pataki, where he, if they want to stand out, right?
Yeah.
They're 1% in the polls. They're not getting into the big debate. They could break ranks here, and maybe it would get them into the next debate. You when you're just trying to get from 1% to 6%, maybe you can do that by being a little different. But on the whole, none of the big candidates that have the money and potential are going to get in the way of this locomotive, I don't think. I think Bush has a problem, because this other story that came out was that he's been involved with Planned Parenthood, at least indirectly, or through an organization that he was part of. I forget the details of that.
It was actually a Bloomberg Foundation on whose board he sits. But there's some family history here.
Sure.
Because his granddaddy, Prescott Bush, senator from Connecticut, was like Mr. Planned Parenthood in the U.S. Senate. And Poppy Bush was on their board until he ran for president. So that's one of the...
He was pro-choice before he... Well, the first time he ran for president, he was pro-choice, right?
Well, sort of. But the broader issue is that this long history of mistrust between the conservative movement and the Bush family, this is one of the aspects of it that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, is they're not considered, even despite the Terry Schiavo thing, despite Jeb's sort of conservative Catholic profile, they don't really trust him on this. And again, it's yet another gut test where the conservative movement wants to find out if its presidential field is going to sell them out. If not now, then when they make that first Supreme Court appointment.
Well, and you got David Souter and now John Roberts.
Yeah.
Who, to my mind, is plenty conservative. But right now, they're not feeling that way in the Republican base. So now the other candidates can go point and say, first you got Souter and now you got Roberts. Why are you going to trust this family again?
Yeah.
Especially when they're squishy on Planned Parenthood. And then he has to do what he does not want to do, which is make clear that he's on the right side here, or the anti-Planned Parenthood side, because he does not want to get pushed that way against Hillary.
Yeah.
And get this gender gap explode.
Yeah, Nancy, Yeah, that's
this is another area where Jeb would like to push.
Hello?
You there?
Nancy, you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, sorry, we had a little buffering issue.
Little glitch.
Yeah, that's okay. It happens. Nancy, let me ask you about that. What Martin just raised. When conservatives hear the words Planned Parenthood, they immediately think of abortion clinics, and they specifically think of late-term abortions, which are a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of abortions. Number one, and number two, abortions are a small part of what Planned Parenthood does. Mm-hmm. Your average Democrat or probably independent woman thinks of Planned Parenthood and thinks of health care, birth control, maybe abortion too, but not as the primary thing they do. So do you think there's a risk that, however this turns out on the funding issue, that going after Planned Parenthood in this sort of over-the-top, high-profile way is going to backfire on them among the very voters they're going to need in November 2016?
Well, you see, and we all know this. That's the problem on just about every issue. What these candidates have to do to get through the primary, in so many ways, then is very likely to come back and haunt them in the general election. Not to get off topic, but the fact that they're willing to forego any really even moderate position on immigration reform tells you sort of your answer to that, and I think that, the whole sort of women's health issue, I was remembering as this was, sort of heating up that the Republicans tried to do this to Planned Parenthood in 2011 as well. And they tried to defund Planned Parenthood. Now, they didn't have this emotional sort of appeal of, Planned Parenthood, harvesting baby parts, which is a total, blow up of what's actually going on. But they didn't have that. But, yeah, the big issue that surfaced then, I was remembering when Senator Kyle went on the Senate floor and said that 90% of Planned Parenthood's business was abortion, and then had to retract that and say that what was his thing? It wasn't a truthful statement, or wasn't meant as an accurate statement, or something like that. Yeah, it was just the most absurd.
It was truthy.
Yeah. So, they've tried this before, again, without the big emotional plug of these videos, but, people pushed back pretty hard on that. One of the things I haven't heard anybody comment on that I think would be interesting to know, that was all pre-Obamacare days, when, for a lot of women, the only way they could afford health care was through things like sliding fee scales at Planned Parenthood.
Right.
And now, with Obamacare, a lot of those women probably have insurance. And how does that play in, to, the whole mix of things for Planned Parenthood? I don't know. I haven't heard anybody talk about that, but, Obamacare covers preventative care and reproductive care and, a lot of those things in a way that a lot of women used to not be able to get anywhere but Planned Parenthood, know. So that might change the dynamics a bit for all I know. I really don't have a sense of that.
Well, if I had to guess, I would say that at tonight's forum, the candidates will be given an opportunity to vent about the videos, mm-hmm. And echo the signal that they share the anti-choice movement's characterization of this as illegal abortions and illegal harvesting of baby parts for illegal sales. And probably the same in the official event, but certainly by next week, Erickson is going to be pushing them to the wall to say, are you willing to show your fidelity to these activists who have been supporting you all these decades faithfully by going to the mats, making this more important than Obamacare, making this more important than DHS, more important than immigration, more important than all these other issues you've been willing to talk about a government shutdown about, because this is the American Holocaust. This is actually the way anti-choice activists think about this.
Right.
And, I think by next week they're going to have to not simply posture the way they usually do, but take some sort of definitive stand, as will congressional leaders. So it could be pretty crazy.
Yeah, and here's where I think, the other side has to think about a response, because this is a very guttural, emotional kind of appeal. And we tend to come at things with all of our rational, here's, about choice, and here's about, our rational sort of layout of the whole issue, about fetal tissue research and stuff like that. And, when the stakes are so high in terms of the emotional content, I'm not sure that kind of message necessarily always gets through.
No, you're right. I mean, I always make the argument that for most of the anti-choice activists we're talking about, there's no difference to them morally between a late-term abortion and using an IUD.
Right.
They've seized on late-term abortions because they know that's something that's either confusing or upsetting to the vast majority of people who are not absolutists in either direction on this subject. And every time they're in trouble, they come back to this issue.
And I think you kind of laid it out maybe before already. The response is really a two-pronged response. One is about the issue of choice and abortions. And the other side of it, is about fetal tissue research. They're using the fetal tissue research to get at abortion. And so, in response, you sort of got to take this on two different levels. I think, for the fetal tissue issue, it reminds me of the whole question that arose a few years ago about stem cell research. I think you can do that, in a way that really gets at, sort of the long-term health benefits that come from it. But at root, this really is about access to abortion.
That's right. And Martin, before we close, what do you think we'll be talking about at this point next week? Is it going to be this issue? Is it going to be what happened in the debates? Are we going to be back to talking about Donald Trump? Or are we going to be talking about Joe Biden? What's your guess?
I think that we're going to be talking about Trump, and then we're going to be trying to find a little time to slot other things in. And then there'll be pressure points like government shutdown that'll focus our attention on other things. But
speaking of other things, today the president's going to issue the administration's final regulations on climate change. That was a subject some Republicans were talking about shutting down the government over last year, right, Martin? Yeah.
And they have bipartisan support on, I don't know what Manchin's going to do, but he's not alone on the Democratic side. They have governors. They have it's a regional economic divide more than a party divide, whether or not your state relies on coal. And so they can get more of a wedge in there on an issue like this, divide the Democrats. Something suffers if you get off on the Planned Parenthood thing and that becomes your vehicle. Then the coal thing slips between the cracks, I guess. I don't know. I don't see how they're going to.
Well, I guess the big picture, and Nancy, you can weigh in on this.
Anyway.
The big picture, Nancy, you can weigh on this if you want to, too. Republicans are in a position in going into 2016 where they can't do anything that won't provoke a Senate Democratic filibuster and or a presidential veto. So all they can really do is threaten to or actually shut down the government. That's their only ultimate leverage point as long as Democrats stick together. And until such time as they win the White House and hang on to Congress, they're going to be dealing with all these frustrations and all of the competing demands of these Republican constituencies, right? But there's this sort of competition to show I'm the big issue or my issue is the biggest because we're going to shut down the government over this, right? Isn't it sort of a weird competition?
Well, and as that kind of, to me, what's interesting about that is that kind of chaos sort of ensues. Then how does that reflect ultimately on the 2016 election? Yeah. Generally, we'll see this chaos going on, as candidates, both presidential as well as congressional, sort of chase, these various issues. And then all of a sudden we get through the primaries and we get to the general, and what does it look like? I wondered how Mitt Romney would, spin. Well, these guys, once we get past the primaries, are going to have a gargantuan leap to make in the general election. Because, I just don't believe that, the 25% that's supporting Trump is going to call the election in 2016, So it's going to be interesting to see what that does to the Republican candidates across the board if they're perceived, now that's the big question, but if they're perceived as the party of chaos.
Well, it sounds like paradise for political bloggers anyway. We probably need to wrap it up now. This has been fun. We'll have to do this configuration again. Thanks a lot to Martin Longman and to Nancy LeTourneau. And please tune in next week to the Washington Monthly Show.